You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Of course, we were happy that it turns out our position is supported by the general public. For some time, we were kind of had this feeling that we were alone in this effort, that people have forgotten the issue. And at one point, iniisip pa nga namin na kasi ang layo sa bituka, di ba? Na parang nagkapanahon kasi na ang taas ng inflation, ang taas ng hunger incidents. Parang yung mga tao, kaysa sa mag-isip ng iba, uunahin nila yung kumakalam na sikmura. But then it turns out, despite everything that, would have usually occupied primary space in people's brains, ito talagang isipin ko,
Two separate polls find that there is now majority support among Filipinos for the International Criminal Court's probe of the war on drugs and for rejoining the ICC. In this episode, a lawyer for drug war victims and their families weighs in.
well, they've been listening and then they've been studying. And this point forward, I think for us, the challenge is to raise these numbers. This is an increase from the previous figures. And so there is space for development. So masaya kami, pero at the same time, challenge na, naku, kailangan, paabutin namin to ng 100%, syempre.
I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News.
Christina Conti, Secretary General of NUPL, National Capital Region Chapter. And I'm also assisting the victims of the war on drugs under Rise Up for Life and for Rights, and also registered as assistant to counsel before the International Criminal Court. So that means I can also practice before the court.
I spoke to Attorney Conti shortly after polls released by the social weather stations and Okta Research found that well over 50% of Filipinos support the International Criminal Court's drug war probe. To be more specific, 53% of respondents told SWS that they approve of the ICC's inquiry. 56% also said the Philippine government should allow the probe to continue. Meanwhile, 55% of Okta Research's respondents said they believe the government should be cooperating with the probe. These numbers mark a turning point for several reasons. As recently as March 2023, a similar survey conducted by SWS found that only 45% of respondents, that's less than half, approved of the ICC probe. These same pollsters showed us that even at the height of the drug war killings and abuses under Rodrigo Duterte, approval for both the president and his administration's flagship campaign remained high. Previous SWS surveys found that nearly 80% of Filipinos believed rights abuses were being committed amid the drug war, but still supported it until at least 2019.
Public approval or public support, does that in any way affect the effectivity of an investigation, how the investigation is conducted, the level of accountability that you might be able to extract after an investigation?
We hope that this would not have an effect, in the sense that the work of investigating extrajudicial killings should not depend on public opinion or on popularity ratings. Kumbaga, kung sikat ngayon na mag-imbestiga, saka lang mag-iimbestiga. In the ICC especially, these surveys actually have no to little effect except for one possible kumbaga, arena where this can come in. There is a criteria where they measure or they look at the country, and if there is an investigation, they want to know if this would be in the interest of justice. And that's a broad term, in the interest of justice. And a survey that supports an investigation and for accountability will tell them that, well, this kind of ICC investigation and trial eventually would be in the interest of justice of a country. Because imagine if the ICC knew that there is a case that could be filed within a country, and they had enough evidence, but the people do not support an ICC investigation, and perhaps they support a domestic investigation, or they support no investigation at all. Parang it won't be in the interest of justice because it could create chaos within the country, it could create further division, and so the ICC would rather not investigate.
Both the Duterte and Marcos administrations have tried to argue along these lines, claiming that our local authorities and courts can ensure accountability despite the incredibly low rate of convictions. But Attorney Conti says it's not just public opinion that matters. The ICC has conducted its own research on the need and support for its probe, reaching out to Filipinos directly affected by the drug war.
This is also in context of the ICC asking for comments from the victims. There has been 3 rounds of this, views and concerns from the victims. A healthy majority, kumbaga, participated, a healthy number, but up to 1,500 families or individuals, I think, chimed in.
For context, an SWS survey typically interviews some 1,200 Pinoys, equally spread out across Metro Manila, the rest of Luzon, the Visayas, and Mindanao. They're also equally divided in age and gender.
They sent in their representations, sent through emails, sent through mail, sent videos, sent written messages. And when asked if they wanted to pursue an investigation, an overwhelming majority, 96%, said yes. So altogether, it's victims, it's the general public, the Philippines. It will be in the interest of justice for the ICC investigation to continue in the Philippines.
We'll pause here. I ask Attorney Conti more about the probe when we return.
As someone who is working on this case, are you hopeful also that these new survey results might affect the Marcos administration's decision on whether to cooperate or not cooperate with this probe?
Well, yes. In this situation, there's a lot of political will that could affect the ICC investigation and eventually the trial. This survey shows that there is public support for an ICC investigation.
And have you so far seen any signs from the administration that they might be more open to cooperating?
There were a few signs, but I can't really say it was directly from the administration. In fairness, on the part of President Marcos, he's been consistent. He's been saying that we will not cooperate with the ICC and that the ICC has no jurisdiction. I think he just opened the door a little bit when he said, I will study that issue of rejoining the ICC or cooperating with the ICC is up for study. And then recently, with the question of are the ICC investigators already in the Philippines? Sabi niya, di kung nandito na sila sa Pilipinas, edi parang wala tayong magagawa. But in general, the principle is in place. We will not cooperate.
That brings us to another finding from Okta Research. 59% of Filipinos now want to rejoin the ICC.
So for us, it was really very positive. Natuwa kami kasi to some extent, iniisip namin na yung sinasabi namin, tumatagos. We've been rather alone, rather, we are the minority in this debate as to rejoining the ICC. In the government, the prevailing logic, the prevailing story narrative is really that the ICC has no jurisdiction in the Philippines. Of course, we want to counter that. And although I know that we are not alone, we have the ICC telling the people na, no, kabahagi kayo. You should still be cooperating, and there is value in joining the ICC. Take note that the people who have been discussing about this are speaking in English. So majority of the debate over this issue has been in English, the English language. And sabihin na natin para dun sa mga may alam, may nakapag-aral. Pero yung sa simpleng mamamayan na nahagip din itong ICC survey na ito, ibig sabihin, may tumagos. This is positive in the sense that the message really we have been sending out is this. The ICC is important to rejoin, because it is not a threat exactly to your Philippine sovereignty, but it is a threat to despots, tyrants, mass murderers everywhere in the world. And that's me paraphrasing Harry Roque when he supported the ICC in 2011. That's his tweet.
If we were to rejoin the ICC, as most of Filipinos now want, would that in any way affect this ongoing probe if we were to rejoin while it's still happening?
As regards the probe itself per se, I think there's very little that rejoining would do. But in the implementation of decisions, of orders by the ICC, then a lot. After this, sige, nakapag-imbestiga sila, what happens? They will come up with a indictment. This is a finding that after the investigation and the preliminary examination, they would have to come up with the finding that crimes against humanity were committed in the Philippines and these people committed these crimes and they should stand trial. That's important to note. They should stand trial. They're not going to be tortured. They're not going to be summarily killed. They're going to stand trial and they're going to be entitled to due process. They can defend themselves there. That's important. After that, now the court will have to issue summons or warrants of arrests. If you're not a member of the ICC, you won't be compelled or you're not required to implement that. After trial, there will be sentence. It's two parts. You could be imprisoned of up to 30 years, or the ICC actually can recommend life imprisonment, but I think their maximum is 30 years. So just so that you can see the court as humane. There's also this aspect of reparations, so fines, monetary remuneration for the victims. If you're not part of the ICC, you cannot be compelled to implement either the imprisonment or the fines, because in some cases they would ask the government to also contribute to the fund that will be distributed to the victims. So in specific terms, one, let's take it positively, no? If we rejoin the ICC, if we are a part again of this of the Rome Statute, the PNP will be compelled or required to implement warrants of arrest or summons. Two, if there is someone who is convicted, this is an option actually among ICC members. You can host the convicted in your own penitentiary. So the jail in the ICC is only for those who are being held in trial. So the jail in The Hague is supposed to be for those who are still standing trial. And you're just being imprisoned, so just you can stand trial. But after that, well, when the objective of the imprisonment is for rehabilitation, is for penitence, di ba? Yung sentensya na talaga, then you have to serve that in the penitentiaries of the different ICC members. And so if we were a member, we could host in Bilibid whoever will be convicted, we can offer, whether it's a Filipino citizen, no, or any other citizen, we can host. Oh, we're offering Bilibid as the penitentiary for whoever is convicted with ICC. And then lastly, of course, the trust fund for victims or the remuneration for victims, we might be asked to contribute to the pool.
I think based on these survey results, it's safe to assume that the listeners of our show, at least, want to see accountability and are even impatient to see it done. So, for those people who want to see an investigation, want to see accountability for the drug war and drug war abuses, knowing that, majority of Filipinos hold that same view, is there anything that they can do while they're waiting for this investigation to play out?
But right now, I think the general public can really help with creating an atmosphere, a conducive atmosphere for victims to come out, to take out the stigma of having been involved in any drug related activity, or worse, in tokhang cases. Because for many, it's been hard to admit that maybe I have a relative who was natokhang yung relative ko, because it would mean that you were part of the drug trade. We'd like to erase that stigma because not everybody, again, in the war on drugs, were actually part of the drug trade. Another would be to also encourage the perpetrators. And this is important. So during the war on drugs, there were a lot of people who were implementing this. Police officers, I would say even politicians. Diba? Sabi nga, may narco-politicians na involved. And many others. I mean, you had a lot of assets. And now we don't know if any of them have, kumbaga, rejected the entire idea of the war on drugs, of Tokhang. And if any of them have, we are hoping that they would come out and help us during trial and even during this investigation and provide insider information. And this is critical. An insider witness in the ICC has almost always secured conviction. This is someone who would tell you the inner details. Sa totoo ngayon, bulag kami dyan. Sabi nila may quota, sabi nila may reward, sabi nila yung one time, big time, ito daw yung policy. But we don't have someone to say it on the record na may personal knowledge.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. Pidoy Blanco edited this episode. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior news editor is Veronica Uy. If you found this episode useful, share it with a friend or two, and thanks for listening.